Hello, Enrich community. Welcome back to the Enrich Podcast, a show where we explore topics that inspire you, grow you, and make a better version of yourself. Welcome again, Maria. We are so excited to do this together. I'm so happy that Maria and I connected again and talk about the topics that are very important. I love Maria's passion, so I can go on and on about you. And if you have been tuning in since day one, you know that Maria is a very important part of my podcast here in this platform because she's passionate about the topics that I'm passionate about. So she does not need any introduction, but if you are tuning in for the very first time, check out the description below how you can find her, work with her. So all about her. So welcome again, Maria.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And yes, it's always a pleasure being here and working with you because we are passionate about helping people live better, more ideal lives. Yeah,
I agree. I love that. Yeah. Thank you. So today's topic is very important to me and it should be important for you too. It's all about learning how to set boundaries and why they're important and how do you know when it's time to set boundaries. So let's delve right into it. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what are boundaries and why is it important to set boundaries?
So to me, boundaries are the limits. It's your limits. It's what you allow in your life, what you're welcome to have in it, and what, how much is the limit of what you want in your life and what you don't want in your life. So that's the way I would describe it.
Right. I love that. Are there any specific signs that you can maybe tell me and tell audience about, like, what are the important signs that you know it's time to set boundaries?
Well, it all depends too, because there's different types of boundaries. So maybe we can start with that. Is that okay? So, it's the limits in your life. So people have financial boundaries, they'll have boundaries in their relationships, romantic relationships, personal relationships, family relationships, work relationships, all relationships. Mm-hmm. There's boundaries, physical boundaries. There is emotional boundaries. There is sexual boundaries. There's everything that is part of your whole being as a human being. There is a boundary.
Mm-hmm. The reason why I asked, because last year I was really struggling with setting boundaries and I knew it was time for me. I'm like, something is really off. I'm very good with communicating, but I was having a hard time. I felt the guilt and I felt like I always had to put my needs on the side. So few signs that I noticed within myself, I started to become resentful when I had to help someone. And I love helping people. Like, this is how I give my energy to. It's my love language. And something that I had a realization about is, like, I was having hard time, like I wanted to disappear, run away, because I'm like, another thing, because I have to deal with my own issues first. So is this something that you've noticed with people who are struggling boundaries, or even maybe you have had a time where you were struggling with boundaries and you thought, like, why do I feel this way? I need to dig deep, because that's what I thought. And long story short, I've been very open to, like, new ideas and, like, how I can improve and help myself. And there is this book club that I joined and I ended up reading this book. It's called Set Boundaries and Set Free, something like that. I'll link the link below in the description. But that is what made me realize I was struggling with boundaries. And there were a few signs mentioned in that book, like, are you feeling resentful? Do you feel like disappearing? I'm like, oh my God, this book is talking my language. And then the book club that we had, we would meet every week, and every 2 weeks we would talk about, like, the things that we're struggling with and why is it so hard for us to set boundaries. So just wanted to bring that up a little bit because that is how I realized there was nothing wrong with me. It's just because I'm struggling with boundaries for the very first time, where I'm putting others' needs over mine again and again and again and again. So
I hear you saying you're struggling with boundaries, and I hear you speaking that it has to do with helping people, but also relationships. Because I heard two different kinds of boundaries there. So, it all depends on what you want in your life. Mm-hmm. So there's, when you're talking about helping others, is it clients or is it friends, right?
It could be friends, family members, or even colleagues.
Yeah. So, when it comes to boundaries, like I said before, there's like an array of boundaries. Whatever exists in your life has a boundary. Right. So it's what you feel comfortable and worthy. And then sometimes you have to ask yourself, if you're feeling like you heard the word guilt, where is the guilt coming from? How come I feel guilty? And it is sitting with it. And, what is it that I need? What is it that I feel worthy of having in my life? What is it that I know are my non-negotiables? Like, non-negotiables are a great boundary. Like, I know I won't, do this in my life. That is the boundary. I don't know. Maybe you can give me something that would be a non-negotiable for you.
Oh, non-negotiable for me is like my nature walk. Like I have to go for a walk, and it just resets me.
Yeah. So what kind of boundary would you call that to be?
I think with my own self.
So
a relationship, right?
So would you say a boundary for that would be, I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly, is you're saying a boundary is like you have to go for your walk. So if somebody calls you to do something, your boundary would be self-care, it sounds like.
Right.
So that's what it sounds like to me. Exactly. So my self-care is, my boundary is that I'm going to take care of myself in order to be able to take care of others.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean.
That's what I mean.
And like my morning routine is my non-negotiable. Like I need to sit with myself like minimum for 15 to 20 minutes, just restart my day in a way that's slow. Yeah. And spend time with my dog, Pablo. That's also very important to me. So self-care, I love that. Yeah.
So self-care boundaries, right? I know people, especially as time goes on in life, sleep becomes the boundary for self-care. Is, no matter what's going on, unless it's an emergency, you have your bedtime routine, you're going to stick to your bedtime routine. But let's talk about some things are like with friendships, right, or relationships, what you will allow and what you won't allow in your life. This is it, like the limits of, knowing that if someone is taking advantage of you, if someone is mentally abusing you, or a physical boundary, like how close. Again, I do this a lot with kids when I work with them, or even adults, or people who have never been allowed to learn boundaries because they have suffered trauma or some kind of abuse. So, we work with the word stop. So, tell me when you're comfortable, and I would just come closer until you're ready, and learning to say stop. And learning to listen to your body, listen to your senses, listen to your intuition, listen to your heart, listen to your mind, listen to your whole body. Being quiet and allowing to learn stop. And that stop could go with what you're willing to accept from your friends and what you're willing what you need, what you're willing to take. Physical boundaries, what I did now. Emotional boundaries, how much emotion you're willing to give to people and how much you're willing to take.
Right.
The financial boundaries, if someone's knocking on your door asking for money all the time, and with family, if there's too much, knowing when to say I can't, or I won't, or this isn't working for me. Right. Friendships. When friendships you're feeling are overstepping boundaries because they're getting involved in your personal life, they're getting involved in your marriage, they're getting involved in how you raise your children. Right. Those are all boundaries, and it's learning your limits of how much you're going to allow or how much you want, and learning to be able to say stop or no thank you, or whatever language works for you, because we're all individuals speaking our own different languages.
I love that. And I think we all need to understand that time to time we tend to, or some people tend to overstep your boundaries. It's important to communicate that. And something that I realized and I had to really understand was guilt is, when you set boundaries for the very first time, it's foreign, right? It's very first time.
Especially for people who have never been given that blueprint, right? On what a boundary looks like,
right? And something that I can share last year when I was setting boundaries with a few people and with myself too, I realized it was very hard for me. Even with certain things, I'm like, I'm so used to doing this, like going out of my way to show up even when I'm tired. I'm like, I don't need to do that. I'm like, I'm violating my own boundaries. So it started with me. And then I started setting boundaries outside of me too, like with people. I was very communicative. Like, this is what I'm going through. This is what I need at this moment. And I realized that I started to lose some relationships, and the guilt came in after that. And it was, and there were so many people who were so receptive to that, which is like, I am like super forever grateful for, because I've always found that I am very receptive of other people. When they're telling me, hey, this is what I need right now, I'm like, you do that. That's important. That's important to you, because since day one, self-care and self-love has been very important to me. So I understand that and why it could be important to other people too. But when I started to set boundaries, I realized that other people take it differently. And the guilt kicked in, which I was not so used to feeling that. And it was like, the most uncomfortable feeling I've ever felt. And then what happened, there were a few relationships that ended, and there were a few relationships that got even stronger.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the guilt and why it's important to sit with it?
Use the word guilt, and I've heard you use it a few times during our talk, and that is a primary emotion that you're going to.
Right.
So for me, if I was to work with you one-on-one, we would be asking, I'd be digging deep,
right,
and figuring out, the fact that you have this awareness of guilt. Where does it stem from? What is your guilt actually? Because, we all say love, guilt, hate, whatever word we're using for emotion, but it means differently to everybody. So what does it mean to you? And where is it coming from?
So I think what I understood when I was digging deep and journaling about it and working with my therapist. So it comes from the need where ever since I can remember, I have always been, and my therapist actually kind of confirmed this with me. She's like, "Are you like that person who's the helper in the house, the fixer in the house?" I'm like, "Yes." Like, I love fixing things. I'm like, "Yeah, tell me about it. I'll do this for you." I'll even put my emotions on the side and kind of find a solution for someone else. I'm like, this will help them for the future. So I think when I couldn't do that anymore, even though I'm so used to doing that, and like even though I was putting my needs on the side, now I was suffering and I had to deal with my own stuff. That guilt was that feeling that was coming up, like, well, you're not helping anymore. You're like, what is your worth? Like, your identity is the fixer. So that's what I think where the guilt was coming from, is like I no longer could do the things I could do for other people all the time because I wanted to go help. I wanted to go fix things for other people.
Yeah. So it sounds like setting boundaries was something new for you.
Right.
In this.
Openly, I would say. I thought I've always been very open, and I'm very big on communication. So, I talk about things.
So the guilt, would you say, comes from a place of fear of losing out?
I think
relationships,
so.
Or not being liked, or being judged. So it comes from a place of fear.
Right.
So that's it. And then, you're doing the right thing. You're going for support, and you're working through it with a therapist. And, people think people go to therapy for all kinds of big stuff. And not that this isn't big, but you go to therapy to work through whatever is going on inside.
Right.
Right. So that's a beautiful thing to go to therapy for, is understanding where is this guilt coming from? How do I set boundaries so I know I can work on what I allow into my life and what I want into my life and what I won't. So, I'm not feeling that you had to, because this is what working with your unknowns. That's what I always say with my clients. If it's unknown, then you do have fear. Then guilt is a part of fear.
Right. Yeah. And another thing, and I love that you explained so beautifully, another thing that I noticed that I didn't realize that I cared this much about what other people think of me. And not like strangers, like I've never cared, but like the value that I put in other people. And it's in my sphere, like the people I really love and care for, and I always want to make sure they're doing okay, and like what they think of me, because
like an emotional boundary,
right?
Working on emotional boundaries,
right?
So then
So I think that's
where you would go work with now, is emotional boundaries and what that looks like for you. And what your limits of it, and what you will allow, what you wouldn't. The one thing I did want to bring up is when we talk about boundaries, is people start to set boundaries because there's those books, and people, there's a lot of talk, right, in social media and out in the world about boundaries, and sometimes what happens is we start to get very rigid in our boundaries,
right,
very rigid, to the point where when we have anything that's rigid in our lives, that's what's breakable, and that's what becomes very vulnerable, and that sometimes limits our life experience.
Right.
So when people are talking about boundaries with me, I do exercises when I'm working with them, with my own clients, to realize what their boundaries look like, if they're flexible, if they're rigid, if they are too flexible, if they're open, if they're closed. So, doing boundary work with a therapist really will help you grow as a human being,
right,
and know how to be able to articulate and talk to people of your needs, and what you will allow and what you won't allow, and the limits of your life, and to be able to live a very healthy life that way.
Right. I love that. Thanks for the explanation. I do want to talk about the different types of boundaries now, more in detail. You already mentioned a little bit earlier, but let's talk about the different types of boundaries now.
Yeah, and just everything in your life, everything that consists, everything that comes together to make your life will have a boundary. So, like I said earlier, there's the boundary of different relationships, and every relationship has different boundaries. You'll have a different boundary with your mom. You'll have a different boundary with your brother. You'll have a different boundary. So you can't just say familial boundaries or romantic boundaries. That's what something that everybody has to work with. But emotional, like we were just talking about emotional boundaries, what emotions you're allowing people to come into your life emotionally and what you're willing to give.
Right.
We said like mental, which is your thinking boundaries, how much you're going to allow different things you're watching on social media or the news or TV, what you're going to allow to infiltrate into your limits of your life, having those boundaries. There's the social media boundaries. There's all kinds. Everything has a boundary. The thing we mostly work with people is physical boundaries, learning, and that's how you start.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how you see. Because it's such a felt sense. Because if I sit next to you like this, it's completely different, right? You'll get to your lap and like, how come
Stop.
Stop, right? And that's the thing
Over there.
Yeah, but that's how we start to work with boundaries, right? And of course, I wouldn't do that to a client the first time, but that's how you start, because then you it's such a physical reaction. Like, okay, what did you feel? That's the feeling I want my clients to be able to have attunement with when it comes to finances, sexual boundaries, relationship boundaries, emotional boundaries, verbal boundaries, everything, work boundaries, everything, every kind of boundary, everything that exists in your life has a boundary.
Right.
But getting to understand it, the physical one is it just brings everything home, because once you can start to feel it in your body, you'll be able to sense that with everything else.
That's very true. I love that. Thanks for explaining that. I do want to talk about violation of boundaries. How do you deal with someone who is violating your boundaries and like overstepping in your life with like certain boundaries that you have and you've communicated again and again?
Every boundary that gets violated is different, and everyone's boundaries are different. Like I said, everyone's limits are different.
Right.
Some people, it's cultural or it's just who they are as a person, are okay. Like, I'm okay that you touched me, and I'm okay. Other people would be like, please don't.
Right.
Right. Other people would have their limits with, how much you're talking. I know people that before you even start a conversation with them, I ask if they're willing, if they're interested in listening to my conversation.
Right.
Right. So, wow. That's something that I culturally have never been in, in my family or my culture that I grew up in. Not my culture is that I'm Greek, but I'm just a culture in my family that I grew up in. It was never a thing. Nobody ever asked anybody if they wanted to listen to what they had to say. They just would start saying it.
Right.
Right. And so it was something that was really new to me. And it actually took me aback when someone said, you didn't ask me if I wanted to hear your story.
Mm.
And so, these are all new things that you're learning from different people's boundaries. And be open. And being open to, not taking it personally. This is someone else's boundary.
Right.
Yeah. So, there's so many different boundaries. That was a new one for me.
Right.
Yeah, because I'm like, oh, okay. Right. I've never had to ask permission from someone if they wanted to hear my story.
Right. What is something that you could recommend or you could say to a friend who's overstepping again and again?
Maybe you could, in this point, well, two things here that concern me is anytime someone says you should, is losing. This is, through the work that I've done, people who say a lot of shoulds are people who really don't have a lot of control in their own lives, so they say it to other people.
I agree.
Yeah. So that's one thing. But if you're going to someone, everybody wants to vent.
100%.
I said, when I was in school, I said, I'm going to start a bitch call. You just call and just say, I want a bitch. Right? I just want a vent. So our vent call would be a little bit more appropriate, I guess. Right? So you go and you call and you just like, let it out. What I do with my friends is if they're coming to me and they said, I just want to, talk. I ask them, I go, do you want me to listen? Or do you want me to respond?
Right.
Because it's two different, kind of listening. Do you want me to just be here, actually, or do you want me to listen and respond? And they just say, I just want you to be here. And then I just listen to what they have to say, and I go, I hear you, mm-hmm. And then the conversation ends. everything that was said was delete, 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 delete,
Right.
delete. Because sometimes we hate the people we love. in one of my favorite movies, Crazy Stupid Love, Steve Carell says, if you've been married for a long time, you understand you can't hate and love someone so much. It's something like that. It's just like, yes, yeah, you can really hate the person you love the most. You can, I know, even as moms, you get fed up with your kids and just like want to vent, but it doesn't mean that you want the other person to come and say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. You just want to vent.
Right.
And, a good friend is someone that just listens. But if you need advice, that's when you say, listen and just give me like your take on the situation. But if you're venting and you haven't had that conversation already and they start with the shoulds and the should, just say, listen, you could just say, all I needed was a friend to hear me out.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that.
I don't need any advice. I just needed someone to hear me out. Mm-hmm. Could you be that friend? And if you find a person isn't being that friend and you've asked them, then that's when you have to set your boundaries to know that person is not the person you call.
Very true. Do you want to share like a recent example? One of my friends, I've been just there for her for the last few weeks. She's just going through something right now. And I could feel myself feeling anxious to myself because, we have our shit to deal with too, right? Mm-hmm. So I texted her. I'm like, hey, today, you need me? I'll be here mentally, perhaps, but I need to go for my nature walk. I'm going to take care of myself so I can show up for you. In the most best way possible. My friend, she's like, hey, you take care of yourself. No problem. And I feel like this is just changing the narrative of like.
And what the thing is, when you start to set your boundaries, and you said it earlier in our conversation, you might notice that relationships will fall apart. Nothing bad. All it is that the people that are falling away from your life are the people who are not living how you are.
So true. They're not aligned with the boundaries.
So it's just, setting your boundaries this is what I need. What I work with also is, when people are setting so many boundaries that they're closing off life. So, that's a balance. Everything in life is a balance. So you having healthy boundaries, but if you're having too many rigid boundaries, are they affecting everything in your life? Are they affecting all your relationships? Are they affecting your quality of your life? So your boundary becomes a wall.
Right.
So is it a boundary or is it a wall? So, though that's when you have to start sort of sitting back. But what you did there was very healthy. And it sounds like that's very healthy communication with you and your friend. They understood that in order for you to be there, you also need to fill your cup.
Right.
Yeah. So, that's the thing with boundaries is knowing that you're setting a boundary, not a wall. And you'll be able to keep it healthy. So it's healthy. So you have healthy relationships. And the relationships that fall out were the unhealthy relationships. So,
Absolutely.
This is where, my big thing is gratitude. That's when you find gratitude that these people have gone their way and you have gone your way and you have created space for other healthier relationships to grow within your life. No one's going to like everyone and not everyone's going to like you, and being okay with that. And that's where the healthy boundaries come in. When, you say like, I'm the kind of morning person, so I need to go to bed at 9 o'clock, 9 to 10. And then, friends fall out because they're the kind of people that are going to go to bed at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and they want to do different things. Well, that's okay because that's who they are. Mm-hmm. It's okay for them to be them and you to be you.
Right.
Right.
And there are also relationships where they're like, okay, you know what? I like doing this. And that's okay. I really understand what you're up to and what you like.
Yeah.
But those are healthy relationships.
Yes.
Like, for instance, you just mentioned, like, they're out partying till 1, 2. Nothing wrong with that. That's their lifestyle.
That's their life.
But they also understand someone who doesn't like doing that, but they love the connection that they have. So
then you meet on a Saturday brunch.
Yes.
Right. So the health, that's again, healthy boundaries with relationship is, knowing that everyone's okay with the other person the way they are. And if they're not, that's okay too. Expect with growth. The thing is, and as you change, relationship will change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all growing and evolving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I always say, you're not growing higher than them or lower than them. You're growing differently than them.
Right.
And that's all it is.
Yeah. Thank you, Maria. Well, that was amazing. Like, I love the tips that you shared and like the way you put it all together. So always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here today. Anything else that you'd like to share before?
I always like to leave it so people know that they're not alone in life. And, you were just saying earlier how you talk to your therapist and, not have my clients. And there's plenty of people out there that you can contact and talk to and know that, there's always someone you can go to. And, you could go and you can learn and you could talk to anyone find a person that you're comfortable with talking to, not just anyone. Be able to find who you are inside.
Right.
And to be able to know what your boundaries are.
Right.
Right. And how to live aligned with them. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you, Maria, once again for being here today.
You're welcome.
I always love having you here. Thank you so much for tuning in, Rich Community. I hope you found this episode valuable and share it with someone that you truly care about. And make sure you leave us a comment below. Let us know how we did and any questions that you have for us that we can answer in the next episode. And also subscribe to our channel. Once again, I'm going to leave you with this like I always do, sending you a lot of love and positive vibes. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.